How many of you recognize this guy? If you've been following what's going on in the chess world for 10 years or longer, he might look vaguely familiar to you. This is Boris Ivanov, one of the original pioneers of chess cheating. Now, I should say suspected to be a chess cheater because it was never totally proven. Kind of like what's going on with Hans Niemann today. It was suspected, but with him, it was a lot more extreme because this guy was rated only around 2300 and he just started wiping out super GMs left and right. And I believe he didn't really make any human type errors in a lot of these games. Like, it seems like he was just using the computer for almost every move. Unlike Hans Niemann, who, if he is cheating, and it's a big if, I'm not going to say one way or the other. I honestly have no idea. If Hans Niemann is cheating, he's being a lot smarter about it because you look at his games and he's got a lot of human-looking errors in there. But this Ivanov guy was just playing like a machine. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this game. He's playing a super GM. I think in this game he's rated 2318 versus a 2604 GM named Grigoriev, and he beat him. I don't think Ivanov's career lasted much longer after this game because it came down to a situation where he was in a tournament and they asked him to remove his shoes and he refused because they had pretty much figured that if he was cheating, he had it hidden in his shoe. I think he was like walking with a limp or something. That was highly suspected to be the way he was doing it. And he refused to move his shoe and he was disqualified from the tournament, and I think that was pretty much the end of his career. But anyway, without any further ado, let's take a look at this game. Ivanov has the black pieces against the super GM Grigoriev playing white. So the first moves of the game, pretty much in well-known theory, so I won't talk about them too much. These are all moves that could have conceivably been memorized by both players until white kind of deviates from the main line with this knight to h4 move. Okay, hitting the bishop there. Ivanov drops the bishop back to e6, and then we got e4. Okay, this is fine. Ivanov castles, and then our super GM goes wrong with the move queen to c2. And of course, Ivanov finds the top computer choice, knight to a6. The better move here would have been knight c3, and if d4 is played, we're not going to worry about that too much because even if c5, we have this nice f4 square for that knight there. It's fine. But after queen c2, you got this knight a6 move, which threatens to drop into b4, which is going to come with tempo on the queen, and there's going to be a potential to win this a pawn here with the bishop after this pawn is taken here. So let's say you just try to go knight c3 and develop. There's this knight b4, the queen moves over here, and then d4 hits the knight, and then you win the a2 pawn like that. Or if you try to stop knight b4 with a3, you got pawn takes knight c5. He gets that nice c5 square. And if knight c3, bishop c4, getting some nice activity. So that's kind of the deal with this knight a6. You got the dual ideas of knight c5 or knight to b4. So it was definitely the best move. e5 played by white. The knight drops back, and now knight to f3 because the knight was now in danger of being captured and black would win a pawn there on h4. So now we got knight b4 hitting the queen. Queen goes to e2, and then we have bishop to f5 targeting the pawn on d3. Okay, white defends rook d1, knight c5. We're piling up on that pawn. Knight e1. Now this is a very sad move to have to make as white, but if you go d4, which may have been white's best chance, you got knight to c2. You can do that. Now, the engine thinks knight e6 is even better, doing that move first, and there's this threat of coming into c2. But you can immediately drop into c2, and then white can get that pawn on c5, but then you're getting the rook, and then you can try to trap the knight on a1, but then black can grab the pawn with bishop c5. And I guess our super GM did not like that line, and the computer does say that black has a nice advantage. So knight e1. Just trying to defend that pawn there. Now we got d4, knight a3, development. Now you can't go to d2 because you need protection on that pawn, so knight a3 and then a5. Okay, so the threat here is something like this, targeting this pawn here on a2 again, and if you go b3, then a4, And you can see black's going to open that file with activity for the rook, and also, well, the b3 pawn's under fire. So if you take, then knight takes a4 is nasty, threatening to come in here with a fork. Yeah, this is too much activity for black, so you don't want to allow that. So this move here is played to immediately challenge that knight on b4. Okay, so now we have this queen d7. Developmental move there, not worried about the knight taking on b4, because all that's going to do is activate the black rook. Okay, so b3 played by white. He wants to develop his bishop this way, along this diagonal, and you don't have to worry about this a4 move for the moment because the knight will be captured. So f6, striking at this pawn here, and now we got bishop to a3. Taking the pawn was an option, but this kind of helps the development of the dark squared bishop maybe. So our super GM goes with bishop a3. And now we got this rook f to e8. All right, just moving the rook, placing it opposite white's queen. If you take the pawn, then knight takes on b4, takes. So you don't get a free pawn there. And if you try to take on c2 first, queen takes, you still don't get a free pawn because now you're losing your knight on c5. It's not working, so this is a good move here. Bishop takes b4 now. Pawn takes, and now taking here. Here, queen d2 played because the queen was now attacked by the rook, targeting this b4 pawn, which black doesn't have a good way to save, but it doesn't even matter because with all this activity, the engine agrees that black is the winning side here, even though white's a pawn up. Okay, so knight a6 hitting the queen drops back, and then the rook's double. Now, the current version of Stockfish says bishop g4 is a much better move here. And if you try to block with the knight, we get queen to f5. It doesn't like this move rook a to e8 as much, but it's hard to say what computer program was being used for this alleged cheating. Could have been an older version that suggested that this was the top move, rook a to e8. Now our super GM plays bishop to f3, trying to keep those rooks out of e2. Doesn't want that. Now Stockfish actually prefers knight to f3, allowing rook e2. Doesn't look very good, but the queen can just drop back, and then you can challenge that rook with bishop to f1. That apparently is white's best chance. After bishop f3, we have a top move here. I think it's, well, Stockfish likes h6 a little better, but no, now it changed its mind to bishop g4. Yep, top computer move. Looking to eliminate that light squared bishop. And now, let's say, if you allow this to happen, let's say it was black to move again, and then the rook comes in, and then the queen comes to f5. This is looking pretty bad. What are you doing? You can't move that knight or you got a problem on f2, and so you're all kind of tied up there. That's what black would like to do. So queen f4 addresses that. So now if you take, there's no queen to f5. It's not working as good for black. So black plays bishop to h3 instead. And now there's a weird move from white. It's b4, which I couldn't really understand, but I think the point is here that b5 is what white wants to play. If white could get in that move, then c takes b5 would not be great because now you can play this variation, bishop g2, and if the knight goes here, there's takes, queen f3, and there's no knight d5. I think that's the point. You're trying to remove a defender of d5. If you don't get that move in, which white never has the chance because black plays knight c7, so now this move didn't really accomplish anything. If you play it now, the knight just takes it. So it was kind of a wasted move. And if you try this bishop g2 stuff, the knight just gets the hop to d5. And yeah, so queen d2 played by white, just anticipating the knight hopping to d5, I guess. Now the bishop back to g4, and then, okay, so we have a little back and forth here. If you try this, then we're going to take the bishop. So what happens here? Now Ivanov decides to capture on f3, which is not the top choice by Stockfish, but it's winning. Everything's winning here for black. You got queen takes, and now you got knight b5. New plan, we're going to hop into e2, and we're going to cut off an escape route for the white queen, and the queen's going to get stranded. So knight g2 played, just trying to develop somehow. Knight hops into c3, trying to oppose these rooks on the open file, but nope, knight to e2 check. You got to move the king, and now bishop g5 clearing the way for a rook to attack the white queen. Okay, so white makes this move knight or rook a to d1, which I'm not really sure why that move was made. It's not necessarily the best move, but white is just losing here no matter what. If you try to, let's say you try to put a rook here, the problem is that the rook's going to attack the queen and then win the pawn on f2 if you don't protect it. So let's say rook f1 trying to protect the pawn, now just g6. And where's the queen going to go after the rook attacks her? You would have to play a knight to f4 and allow your pawn structure to get shattered. So let's say like white makes some passing move and then you go here, here. This is going to be a losing position because the pawn structures, well, I mean, you lose a pawn for one thing. So at this point, after rook f8, our super GM decides to sack the queen, apparently thinking that's the best option. Again, if you move the queen, you just lose the pawn on f2. So queen takes, rook takes, and now he's just down in material. Okay, he has the extra pawn, right? Technically, the material is close to even, but it's a losing game for white, regardless, because we get a pair of rooks off the board, and then white gets to grab this pawn here on d4, but it's not a free pawn because after the knight's attacked, and then, okay, so we have a counter attack on the queen. What ends up happening is the knight moves and then the queen gets this pawn here, and we have a few more moves, but the activity of the queen and bishop, you know, eliminating a knight, just simplifying the game, hitting the rook, and then the queen's going to start gobbling some pawns. Goes here. Rook defends the pawn on b4, b5 hits the rook. The rook takes on c6, and you'd think maybe just queen takes b4, like that's a pretty human thing to do, but instead a check, because you can't move the king anywhere because then you're going to lose your rook, right? So you have to put the knight in the way, and then h6 wants to be able to move the king to h7 in response to that check. Yeah, which we have, and then there's a resignation right here, I think. So that was a game. Very nice game by whatever entity was playing against the Super GM. The general consensus is that it was some kind of chess engine. But still an instructive game, and it was a fun one to go through. So thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing. I'm going to continue to try to make all kinds of chess-related videos, so stay tuned.